Mr. Billingsley has also been a guest lecturer at Columbia University's Harriman Institute, King's College London, the University of Utah, and BYU's Kennedy Center for International Studies. He is the recipient of the MacArthur Foundation Regional Security Travel Grant and has written extensively on security in the Caucasus, Georgia, Chechnya, Armenia, Azerbaijan, to name a few, for various defense and security-related journals, including Jane's Intelligence Review, the Journal of Electronic Defense, and the Harriman Review. Dodge Billingsley has produced documentaries worldwide on location in the United Arab Emirates, Azerbaijan, the Republic of Georgia, Uzbekistan, Russia, Turkey, Bosnia, and China. He recently produced and directed a documentary film chronicling the events of one woman's journey to China during the 1930s and her role in the conflict between the ruling Nationalist Party and the rising Communists as each struggled to gain control in the midst of Japanese aggression. Helen Foster Snow, Witness to Revolution, aired on PBS affiliate KBYU TV. Dodge also co-wrote and produced and directed Immortal Fortress, a look inside Chechnya's warrior culture, a film that took him deep into the dangerous, war-torn breakaway region of Chechnya. Prior to that, Mr. Billingsley worked for Video Ordnance, producing a three-part series entitled Firepower 2000 for the Discovery Channel that explored cutting-edge weapons and the changing nature of warfare. Mr. Billingsley also co-produced a three-part series on the Gulf War 1991 for the History Channel. Please welcome today to the Kennedy Center, Dodge Billingsley.
Thank you very much. Some of you I've seen before in lecturing here. Others are new, and that's good. The topic for today's lecture has changed 2 or 3 times since last week's events, as you can well imagine, because it would seem kind of ridiculous to talk about anything that didn't have some sort of relevance to what's going on now. So you'll have to bear with me a little bit. I'm not going to make one huge excuse for my lack of preparation, but it's all in here. It's everywhere. I mean, as you know, we're being inundated with information. I mean, you read every newspaper, nearly almost all news programs are doing something on the current events. What I would like to do, and I think the title is Afghanistan, Chechnya, and U.S. Counter-Response to Last Week's Events, is I'm going to show you 2 short clips of 2 films. The first one is a film that we're in the process of making right now. It's on the war in Abkhazia, which is in the western edge of the Republic of Georgia. It's not finished. I'm the narrator, which is not meant to be, but that's what you do when you're making a rough cut. It's like a first draft of the paper, so it's a little rough. It utilizes combat footage given to me by different people who were there, Abkhaz and Georgian. The second clip will be from the film Immortal Fortress, the film we made about the Chechen warrior culture. And I want to show those first, and then we'll get into the discussion, and we'll take it from there, and I'll tell you then why it's relevant to even watch these films. So if this works, we think we have the audio hooked up, we'll turn off the lights and we'll do this. If it doesn't work, we'll get right into it. Thanks.
In the early morning hours of August 14, 1992, Georgian forces crossed the Inguri River in a bid to reclaim state sovereignty over Abkhaz separatists. Their goal, the regional capital of Sukhumi, a mere 100 kilometers in front of them on the M27 military highway, the only direct route between the Black Sea and the foothills of the Caucasus Mountains. Meeting little resistance, Georgian units reached Sukhumi southern suburbs in no time, but were abruptly halted at the Red Bridge.
In 1992, this Red Bridge was the first place where the war and between Georgia and Abkhazia began.
Unable to move forward, both sides agreed to a ceasefire, requiring a mutual withdrawal of all military equipment and forces from the city. Georgian units pulled back to the south, while Abkhaz units redeployed to the north. 2 days later, Georgian units broke the ceasefire and shot their way into Sukhumi, past the Parliament building, and pushed their way into the city's northern suburbs. The bulk of the Abkhaz military, already positioned on the north bank of the Dniester River, was able to hold the line against any further Georgian advance. The Gumista would become known as the Western Front.
Shamil's exploits have led others to mimic his actions. Just months after his raid on Budunovsk, Salman Raduyev led his own raid into Russia. Raduyev led the only other major attack on Russian territory against a helicopter base near Kizlar. Even though the Chechens reached the base, there were only a few helicopters for them to destroy. The raid did not lead to Russian concessions, nor were Raduyev and his volunteers granted safe passage back to Chechen territory. Taking hostages, Raduyev's force was eventually cornered in the evacuated Dagestani village of Pervomaisk. After surrounding the village and trying to get Raduyev to surrender, Russian troops attacked. In the ensuing battle, 97 Chechen soldiers and numerous Dagestani hostages were killed. Rather than focus on the losses, Raduyev found victory in the successful retreat back to Chechnya.
И до сих пор люди удивляются, как это так, что произошло? Как это мы оттуда прорвались? Причем большая часть подразделений вырвалась, 180 человек из окружения вышло. Когда мы пробивали второе кольцо, расстояние между танки было настолько близко, 3-5 метров, что еле проходили через них. Настолько все это было спланировано и применены.
One of these 180 volunteers was Adam. He described how their lives were spared due to a sign which persuaded them to take up defensive positions.
Еще что интересно, на Первомайском деле, там не думали, окоп копать, не копать, выпустят, не выпустят, 160 заложников, женщин, там, старики, что русские стрелять нас не будут. Никто не окоп копать. Вот как мы стояли, и 2 голубя белых, прилетели 2 голубя белых, и стали в землю плевать, в снег. Тогда мы поняли, что это не то, что надо окапываться.
Of those who were not so fortunate, of those who died in the escape, Raduyev seemed to speak for all Chechens killed in the war.
Нами двигает дух, вера в Аллаха. Я говорю, идите вперед, идете в рай. Умереть на пути Аллаха для нас высшая мечта. Это трудно понять не мусульманину, но мусульмане наш, вот это самый фактор победы над страхом. Это главный элемент военного искусства.
Even with Allah's help, 7 Chechen volunteers would not have escaped the Russian encirclement were it not for the compassion of a Russian officer.
Они шли ночью, ползком идут, и там окоп, и с русскими столкнулись, прямо вот так, и ноги расстояли вот так. И там, все там, офицер стал полный рост. Он подумал, что вот 7 человек уцелели, эта банда. Короче, офицер им сказал, отдайте наш пулемет, и мы вас отпускаем. Нам вас жалко убивать, если вы оттуда живы вышли 7 человек. Вас жалко убивать и слово, да, что не будет стрелять. Ну, офицер уже упался нормально.
Thanks, Greg. Let's see if this works now. Well, yeah, that works. The 2 films, and the reason why I think they're relevant to this last week's events are because, as you well know, the U.S. there's a lot of rhetoric coming out of the military and political establishment regarding targets, who we're going after, who we think did it, and we may well be right. They may well be right, but there's also another debate raging on, and that is, does bin Laden actually control these different groups, and who are these different groups? And the reason I brought these 2 films in is because I want to talk a little bit about this web or this network, so to speak. It's very loose. In Georgia happened that war that we mentioned, the first war in 1992, 1994, and then it's been stalemated since then. But primarily that war was won by the Abkhaz. You'd think I would have cleaned this up from last time, but I did not. So, this is, you know what? Just use another map. Wow, can people see this? Is that too far away? Anyone see that? Is it too small? Okay, what's that? Okay. Well, right here is Azerbaijan, Armenia. There's got to be a better map than that. Okay, there we go. 1991 to 1996, there was a series of wars in the Caucasus. You have a war in Nagorno-Karabakh. This started first, well, more or less first. Ossetia, Abkhazia, 92, Chechnya, 94. The first Chechen War was 94 to 96. There was a break from September 96 through September 99, basically. And then the war picked up again when the Chechens tried to invade this area, Dagestan. But which Chechens did that? The part about the clip that I showed was Salman Raduyev. And he's kind of a crazy-looking guy, you know, and he thinks that he's really totally a moderate and everything. Well, man, just appearance, you know, you don't look like a moderate. We talked a lot about perception while we were there. In 1994 to 96, it was arguable that the Chechen War was a war of independence. A lot of outside observers, a lot of analysts were saying that this is a group that's been held down by the Russians, and every time Russia gets weak, they want to enforce or try to regain independence, which is true. The war to wrest Chechnya or bring it into the Russian fold in the 1700s lasted 60, 70 years, more or less nonstop warfare before Russia was able to pacify the area. The capital, Grozny, actually was an old Russian fortress. It means terrible, and it was meant to be assigned to the mountain tribes that we're here to stay and we'll wipe you out if you ever rebel against us, and then it evolved into the capital of modern-day Chechen Republic. That was all good, except in 1995, a bunch of Mujahideen holy warriors started showing up in Chechnya. Now, the Chechens did appeal to the West and a lot of other groups for aid, for recognition, but it wasn't forthcoming. In response, Al-Khattab, who is either a Jordanian or a Saudi, and it's kind of no one's really quite sure, came to lead Mujahideen forces. Khattab is a close associate of bin Laden and was known to have trained in Afghanistan there, and a number of Chechens went to Afghanistan to train as well, and possibly Shamil Basayev and some of the other high-ranking commanders. So that's being debated right now, and there's a lot of hearsay, and no one can find out if that's true or not. As you know, in September 96, Russia had no more stomach for the war. They basically pulled out, resulting in a Chechen victory. It was a Russian pullout. They weren't wiped out on the ground, but they had suffered enough. They couldn't take it anymore, and they left. From 1996 to 99, Chechnya became known for two things: kidnapping at an amazing pace. I mean, when we went in at the end of 97, there were like 70-some foreigners had gone into Chechnya, 6 or 7 had come out, and that's it. The rest had all been taken. The day we arrived, the Polish delegation, I think from the European Union, they were kidnapped. They came into Grozny for a different way. They were kidnapped and released 10 months later. The 4 British telecom workers, they found their heads in a gunny sack in western Chechnya. I don't even know if they ever found their bodies or identified their bodies. It was just rampant crime. Now, there's a bunch of conspiracy theories going on that it was the Russians and the Chechens, and we know there's a lot of suspect Russian freelancers, commanders who sell weapons to the Chechens every night, even though they know that they're going to be used against their troops tomorrow, and that's still happening in Chechnya. But the other characteristic was this influx of Arab warriors and Afghani warriors that started to flow into Chechnya. So much so that what sparked the Second Chechen War, even though you remember it may have been the bombing attacks, the so-called terrorist bombing attacks in Moscow, even most Russians, I don't know any Russians today who tell you that that was the Chechens, even though it was pinned on the Chechens to mobilize public support for the war. What really sparked it all was Chechnya invaded Dagestan. And it wasn't Chechnya, it was these Islamic forces. There's a big split in the Chechen military force structure. And to say there's two sides is too simplified, but there's at least probably a dozen. And a good 2 or 3 strong armies, Shamil Basayev's army, Katab's army, they control eastern Chechnya right here. And they moved into Dagestan thinking that the Dagestanis, the idea would rise up, and then that would be the second Islamic Republic on the Caucasus with an overall goal of creating one Islamic nation from Caspian to Black Sea. Chechnya really wanted Dagestan for 2 reasons. If you drive up to Makhachkala, it is the wildest place. Well, Chechnya is the wildest place. Makhachkala is not too bad either. You see brand new Humvees being driven by these Islamic clerics, AK-47 on a gun rack in the back window. It's the weirdest place ever. And it's under Russian control. I'm not sure what's going on here, but they're being supported from Turkmenistan, from Iran, and from Azerbaijan. And it's coming back in a big way. The only thing that's kept Dagestan from actually probably breaking into a civil war, an Islamic jihad, is the fact that there's over 35 ethnic groups and it's fairly split. So no one group can gain, and maybe there's only 7 or 8 powers that are 7 or 8 ethnic groups that align themselves with Islamic jihad. That's not enough to turn the tables. And so the Russians have had better, and plus the Dagestanis have seen what's happened in Chechnya, and they're not sure they like it. Even Chechen women, and this is the point that I think needs to be brought out, is this newest war is fought a lot by these mujahideen. The Chechens were decimated in the first war, but they still held on and fought the Russians and did pretty good. In this newest war, let's see. In this newest war in January of 2000, was it 2001? I can't remember if this was January or last January. Time kind of flies. The Chechens were doing a strategic or tactical withdrawal out of Grozny, just like they did in 1995. They withdrew when they wanted to on their terms. They were able to move 3,000 or so fighters out and into the mountains. Russia missed them, and then that led to this ongoing mountain warfare for another 16 months and eventual loss. This year, coming out, they got caught in a minefield, and then when the Russians realized they were in the field, they thought it was a free corridor. Artillery came in from both sides and killed about 800 or so in about 30 minutes. Most of the senior leadership, not most, but a substantial number of the Chechen senior military leadership was killed just leaving Grozny this year, whereas before 95 they all made it out. Shamil Basayev, who had been considered, I heard people say that he cannot be killed. There's such a myth of invincibility surrounding him. I mean, he has never lost a close combat engagement. His troops have never lost against the Russians. Russians I met have said that when they realize they're fighting Shamil's unit, they go around. It's just not worth the casualties they're going to incur. He lost his leg up to close to his knee and has been kind of incapacitated since. That elevated Al-Khattab, this Jordanian or Saudi-born freedom fighter who's a friend of bin Laden. Now, all through this time, money was funneling into Chechnya from the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, a lot of money. They didn't need weapons because they could get those from the Russians, but they needed money to buy weapons, and it came. And then Stingers arrived from Afghanistan, from the U.S. Weapons stockpiling in the Afghan conflict. There's been a lot of talk about, well, the thermal batteries have gone dead. No way. Chechens are very pragmatic. They've just rigged a little battery packs from Jeeps and cars, and yeah, they have a Stinger and it has like a little battery cord to a truck, and they can work it. They figured it out. In fact, a couple of days ago, I understand the Russian helicopters just shot down with a bunch of their senior leadership in Chechnya. So, and whether it was a Stinger or another man-pad, I don't know. The point is, this war has become a holy war, so to speak. The Chechens have just fled in a mass exodus because they don't even relate to a lot of the leadership that is there right now. The reason I brought up the film in Georgia, the Abkhazia film, was because that was where a lot of these guys got their start. A lot of these Chechens got started back up. Okay, and this is a little more of a close-up of the Chechen-Georgian border. There's an area here, you can't really see this, the Pankisi Valley. I don't know, it probably hasn't even made the press out here. I was there in June. I was trying to monitor border incursions from here to here, from the Chechnya-Georgian border. And the idea was we were just going to see who was doing all the crossing, because the Russians have been saying that the Georgians are crossing the border. I mean, the Chechens are crossing the border back and forth, and the Russians say that. The Georgians have been denying it. And then I'll explain that, and it'll relate to Pakistan. This is why I'm not sure how this lecture is going to come out, because they go, it's like a hub, and there's like a lot of spokes, but I'm not sure what's going to tie into it anyway. We'll give it a shot. When I was there in June, the word was, well, what happened was when this war started, like I said, the Chechens fled en masse, this recent war. They went out this way to South Ossetia, they went this way to Dagestan. Not too many of them went to Russia. Not too many refugees went north. They felt more solidarity or kinship with the other ethnic tribes in the area, so they went east and west, but they also went south. Now, they didn't go into Georgia because they loved the Jordans. They went because in this area here called the Pankisi Valley, it's a group of people called the Kist. They're cousins to the Chechens. They had a little town, about 3,000 people, ran small villages in this valley. About 8,000 Chechens overwhelmed them. The Kist had actually left the valley now. They didn't want to be there. The Georgians have cordoned the area off. There's 4 roads going in, not exactly like that. The Georgians have blown the 2 roads, so there's only 2 ways in. And that way they can monitor. They're trying to monitor. Why? Because Russia wants to open a third front in Georgia to root out these Chechen safe havens. Georgia in no way wants to have Russians on there, and they're trying to get Russian bases removed from the Cold War days. And the last thing they want is more Russians there. They'll never get rid of them. And they also know they can't fight a war against the Chechens. The Chechens, in fact, while I was there, it was really funny. The Russian defense minister made an announcement that the Russians and the Georgians had decided that they would do a joint operation against the Chechens. And the Georgians freaked out. And the next day were like, oh, no, that's a miss, and they were just making sure that they could tell the Chechens or that the press know that they would not do joint operations with the Russians. Well, earlier that day, the Chechen representative in Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, went to the Georgian foreign ministry and said, do you want a war with Chechnya? No problem. The Georgians, they're just not made of the same stuff the Chechens are. I mean, I've been all over that region of all the different ethnic groups, like 56 groups in the Caucasus. There's a few warrior tribes that are just nuts, and that's why they can hold out against hundreds of thousands of Russian troops. The Chechens would take and tear Georgia apart in a matter of months. I think the Georgians realize that. So they're skirting this strange alliance between all the Chechens that are coming in and out of there illegally, but they know they are, and they can't stop them. And Russia, who really wants to get in there and turn this into another Cambodia, honestly, and they don't want to do that because they know it'll be the end of Georgia for sure. In response, they pressured the U.S. and the European allies, and they brought OSCE monitors. This area now is monitored by OSCE mission. And there's a big joke there. I mean, we went up there and hiked all around OSCE, and the joke is like a bunch of Heidi's, with their backpacks, just walk around it's like outward bound. And it really is. They have no power to do anything except observe and write up a report. And it's purely there so that Russia won't make further border incursions. Well, anyway, in the Pankisi Valley, things are happening. Arabs, Muslims, holy warriors were flowing in there. They came from the east, they came from the Middle East, they came from Turkey, they came from all over. So they had about 3,000 people in this Pankisi Valley. A month and a half ago, they crossed the borders into Chechnya. So exactly what the Russians were complaining about was true. Now these 3,000, they've never even been to Chechnya before. This war has totally changed. Now I've heard reports there's 35,000 fighters in Chechnya. That is grossly overestimated. I think there's probably 2,000 to 3,000 fighters in Chechnya, and this number doubled their forces. But this number, they don't see it. I mean, yes, it is a war of liberation, but it's now a war of Islamic jihad as well. They come with a completely different agenda. They also come with a lot of money from the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia and other, which we think is really Western-leaning Islamic countries, which leads to the question, why do these countries allow this? I mean, why is the United Arab Emirates, I go every March, it's so open. I mean, there's bars, there's all kinds of things you don't see in an Arabic country. Why do they support this? I've had Islamic Muslim friends of mine tell me that in jihad you have 2 choices. You can fight or you can fund. And countries like the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, maybe it's not an official government thing, but maybe there's a lot of wealthy, oil-rich individuals who choose to fund this as a way to sort of get off the hook. Bin Laden's father, was one of the wealthiest men in Saudi Arabia. Where's all his money? I don't know. Swiss accounts? I don't think it's likely. I think it's probably spread all over. I think a lot of it's still in Saudi Arabia. I think he's funded out of Saudi Arabia, which leads to this question, this idea of strategy in response to these terrorist attacks. How do you go after these groups? I mean, there's one thing to take away the individuals who are doing it. which is a whole other story. Another thing is to eliminate their funding. But most of the countries that fund these things, the big debate is why. I mean, are they secretly interested in Islamic Jihad, or do they have portions of their population that they just have to appease? It's worth noting that Anwar Sadat was probably our best ally in the Middle East for a long time, Arabic ally, was killed in his own country during a parade by fundamentalists from his own country. Turkey is benefiting the most out of it, the demise of the Soviet Union. For one, they've taken all the trade in the Caucasus and Central Asia. You can see Turkey's trucks everywhere. They're just all over Central Asia and the Caucasus. The other thing they do is they export fighters. They were in the war in Abkhazia in 1992, 93, 94 by the hundreds, which isn't a lot, but the whole war was only fought by a few thousand on each side. Yes, there was probably 20, 30,000 rotated through, but at any given time there's only maybe 4,000 to 5,000 maximum. And there was at least 10% of that was Islamic fighters from Turkey. Turkey has very good relations with Russia. They do trade with Russia. They send freedom fighters to fight in wars against Russia. And they're also in a very tough predicament where the government has had to take there's been a lot of close calls in the sense that Turkey might fall into one of these hardliner regimes, and we don't want that in the West. I think that's why we ignore the Kurdistan issue in the East, and we don't want Turkey to fall into that. However, individuals from Turkey flow to these things. So, getting to any questions so far? Does this make any sense at all? Or you just,
you're talking about Turkey. Are you speaking more of Eastern Turkey, or are you talking about Istanbul, the European?
There's a few villages in Istanbul that gave nearly all their male population to the war in Abkhazia. In Eastern Turkey, I think they've got their own problems. I don't know. That's a good question if you could break it out demographically where all these fighters come from. But I know that there have been from the Istanbul area, from Ankara area, from over by the Syrian side, down by Ceyhan, Adana, those places there. Syria, which is another big supplier of these kind of guys. And they all have their regional disputes. Of course, Turkey has a regional dispute with Syria, and they've gone in and eliminated forces inside Syrian territory a couple times in the last 3 or 4 years, 10 years. But it still doesn't stop them from sending to this pool, so to speak, this like invisible force of people that are willing to carry out this terrorist war. If you look at what's going on now in Pakistan, and I frankly think they have the most to lose. Here's Pakistan. Sorry, this map is smaller than that. And you see Afghanistan and Iran, our favorite neighbors, favorite friends. Well, but ironically, what's gone on recently, Pakistan is definitely an ally to the U.S. in this region. Maybe it should be clarified, or how good an ally are they? But for this region, they've been a great ally. Afghanistan, well, the Taliban. And then you have Iran. Iran just re-elected the president, who's fairly moderate compared to Iranian leaders in the recent past. Not since the Shah, who was basically the U.S. puppet, has there been a leader that at least has made initiatives or overtures toward the West. So now we've declared this sort of war on Bin Laden, who we think is here, and the people who harbored him, Afghanistan. And it's causing all kinds of repercussions in the area. One, the refugees are just flowing right now. Now, Iran and Pakistan have both closed their borders, apparently, but honestly, they've been crossing closed borders for 10 years. It's really easy to get across borders in this part of the world. It's true. In fact, before '95, I never even had a visa or showed my passport to get into the former Soviet Union. You could just slide a box and you can get across. The ruble was at 9,000 to 1. It's hyperinflation. It was remarkably easy. And I thought about, in fact, I even took a boat from Trabzon, Turkey, with a bunch of Islamic dudes on the coast of Abkhazia one night, and we just landed on the beach. And then they were in, or they either them and me. And I read the manifest. In fact, that was the best information I ever gathered. I stole that passenger manifest, hoping they had a copy of it. But it was brilliant because it had all the names and where these people were from and what passports they were carrying. And they were from Saudi, Jordan, Somalia, Ethiopia. I was like, holy cow. Overwhelmingly, about 50 of them from Turkey. And they just caught this little boat here. There was a Russian blockade, supposedly, in effect, and we didn't see a Russian ship. and just went right through and landed on the beach in the morning, and they were in. Jumped off, and that was it. Very easy. What's going on now, you have all these refugee problems. This leads to a bunch of different scenarios. If Bin Laden or his associates or whoever, they want to get out, they'll probably just go with the flow of refugees into Iran or Pakistan. They could go into, they won't go to Tajikistan most likely because that's the head of the Northern Alliance who was killed this week, right? This part is actually, this 5% is not controlled by the Taliban. So they won't go into Tajikistan. They probably won't get into Uzbekistan either. They could go into Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan is the most closed of all the Central Asian states. That's the only place that we got kicked out of before we even got started. We couldn't get in there, and it's just has never really opened up. But a couple scenarios. There's probably about 1 million hardliners in Pakistan, and it's a relative number. But the fact is, they can cause a lot of problems with the Pakistani government. If you look at what Pakistan did, Pakistan actually helped create the Taliban. They put them in place. I asked Pakistani general about that 2 days ago, and he said, well, any kind of stability is better than no stability, and for years we had just nothing but crap coming out of Afghanistan. We were never sure what was happening. Oh, sorry. So they really did a lot to bring the Taliban to power in Afghanistan. In Kashmir, that map is small. I can't see it. I think this is right. In Kashmir, I don't know if anybody knows, India and Pakistan are fighting over that territory, and they've also sponsored the Islamic Jihad there. So that's totally financed by Pakistan. Now the question is, again, it's like the Saudi question or the UAE question. Is it simply that there's just too many of these people it's a force to be reckoned with? They have to appease these groups. They are skating on thin ice, in my opinion. If you put a bunch of hardliners next door and you fight your war with a bunch of hardliners, sooner or later you're going to end up with a bunch of hardliners. But yet Pakistan is still a moderate country in the region and fairly open to the West. Oh, what's 100 million? 160? 160 million. Thanks. I didn't know. It was over 100. There's all kinds of repercussions. If the U.S. forces Pakistan to help out on this, and Pakistan goes for it, it could start a series of domestic terrorist attacks in Pakistan, like the Anwar Sadat in Egypt. It could. I'm not saying it will. I'm not trying to be doomsday, but there's some really serious considerations. Pakistan is in a very tough predicament. Like Georgia is in the Caucasus, Pakistan is in that same predicament right now, even more so. Well, it's going to be tough over there, yeah.
How much control does President Musharraf have over the military? He used to have a lot, but does he have it as much
since he came to power? Yeah. That's a good question. It's hard. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I haven't even really focused on the internal powers that are going like that, that are going on, those struggles. What makes it interesting to me is that you don't want to think, again, I'm not trying to be doomsday, but be in Pakistan's position. The other thing they have to deal with is their fight with Kashmir. India, if you've noticed, has been so happy to volunteer information to the U.S. Of course they are, because they know this really, really hits Pakistan hard. India can make out really great on this. I almost wonder if in the back rooms our leadership is dealing with the Indian leadership like we did with the Israelis or in the Gulf War, and that is we asked Israel to sit that war out because we didn't want it to break the Arab coalition that we had going on. If India capitalizes on this chaos and takes portions of Kashmir, it could also topple the government in Pakistan. So I think, and yet, India's offered everything, bases, whatever we want, but of course they would, because that really sticks it to Pakistan. We'd have to fly over Pakistan, because we certainly wouldn't go around. I guess we could go up over there, but then we have to get permission from China and Tajikistan to do that, and that's even more complicated. China has their own Islamic issue to deal with. All of Western China is Uyghur population, not all of it, but this whole area here is inhabited by the Uyghurs, which is a Muslim group that have also, they've had a few bombs go off in Kashgar and different places. And we asked people, I was there 2 weeks ago, we asked people what they thought of the whole thing, and some supported the Taliban, some didn't, but it's open. And China held a massive military exercise 3 weeks ago there, tanks, armored personnel carriers, fighter jets, everything, and they basically just put Kashgar under siege, took it over. And it was not supposed to be something that foreigners weren't there to see. We tried to get there, but we were there just too late. You could film everything, and the whole point was China wanted everybody to know that we're totally committed to our western territories, and we're not going to let it go. And they didn't hide anything. Tanks were rumbling. From what I understand, people said tanks were just rumbling down every street. I mean, 100,000 troops descended on Kashgar. It's an area it has a lot of possibilities to spark insurrections, and that's, I think, a little bit worrisome. The thing I was going to say about the Kashmir issue is that Pakistan, there's a lot of things that the government has to be concerned about. If they start losing Kashmir or India starts making gains, I mean, one of the only threats, I think, credible threats of nuclear exchange in the world is between the Indians and the Pakistanis. People have been saying that for years, that if there's going to be a nuclear exchange, it'll probably be there. And in a sad way, so what? I mean, we really don't care. I mean, we care, but because it won't generally till now affect us or the Russians, maybe the Chinese, maybe, but all the powers, it's so far removed that there's been no real good deterrent strategy outside of the region to help, make sure that this doesn't happen. And so a lot of people feel like a nuclear exchange will probably go. Maybe it won't be missile launch. Maybe it'll be a car bomb that just goes across, in the trunk of a car. Maybe like a tactical nuke size. I don't know. But that's an area that could spiral out of control should a lot of things line up against it. And I think the U.S., there's a lot of rhetoric going on right now, but I don't think you're going to see any massive moves into Pakistan that would threaten Pakistan, the political situation in Pakistan, that would cause a collapse in Kashmir and a new fight with India and or a fight with with Afghanistan. Now, Iran, on the other hand, what if bin Laden goes there? Are we committed to going after him in Iran? Well, wow, I can't imagine attacking Iran. I think that secretly everybody wants it to be Iraq because we feel that we can do that. We've done it once. We sort of feel like the big left hook in the desert land bridge will work, and it's ideal for mechanized warfare, which leads to a whole other problem. The U.S. has been mobilizing troops, but I think most people realize that you're not going to bring in large bodies of men into a place like Afghanistan and try to comb the area for these people. It hasn't worked. The British in the 1800s had 16,000 people. Was it Kabul? And they tried to do a fighting retreat and were all gone in 3 days. They were just destroyed. No one. That was the whole group. Obviously, the Soviet experience in Afghanistan in the late 70s, early 80s. So those aren't the kind of attacks that probably make sense. I don't think that's the kind of attacks they're planning for, which leads me and probably, I think everybody else probably comes to the same conclusion that it might be a while before we see retribution, so to speak, or counterstrikes. Maybe there'll be a couple public counterstrikes to appease public opinion because President Bush has promised us a war, and a lot of Americans want one. But the target selection, come on, you're talking thousands of fronts of maybe one or two people each. That's it. That's the whole front. It's not like they have this enclave. Bin Laden could have been moving every single day since this thing happened, and we don't even know where he is. He could be in Iran right now. I don't think he is, but if he is, how far does our policy and our commitment go? Do we invade Iran? I doubt it. So fighting terrorism is a much different type of war than any of these other sort of fighting other armies on the battlefield, which everybody knows. Anyway, those are just some of the considerations, I think, that are obviously taking place between our government and other governments in the region. I think there's some things to consider. Countries on the edge like Pakistan, like Georgia, situation in Kashmir, China, these countries have just as much to lose, if not more, because it could destabilize regimes in all these surrounding countries and lead to much more chaos than we think that it exists now, even though we did suffer a loss. Yeah.
So how would you react?
Oh man, I don't know. I'm glad I don't have to. How would I react? Well, you'd probably do the same thing. You'd probably want to pressure all the governments to help you in different ways. Maybe it's through intelligence, maybe it's through logistic support, and just be aware of what the different elements are in these countries, their own Islamic hardline issues they have with their countries. I'd tell India to stand down for a little bit on Kashmir. We might have two interesting allies. China and Russia may become our two best allies on this thing. Although what's interesting is that Russia talked tough, and now they're sort of backing down. And a year and a half ago, when the Chechen War was, when Russia was just having fits in the conflict in Chechnya, they were going to open. They talked about opening a second front to root out all these terrorist bases and stuff that were supposedly in Afghanistan. But I think the reality was Russia could not fight a two-front war. They can't really even handle Chechnya. You know, they've got 100,000 troops, and let's say there's 6,000 Chechen fighters, and I would bet my life that there's no more than that, if there's even that many. But, you know, you live in a cave, 2 or 3 to a cave, and you each carry a couple man pads and a couple RPGs and things like that, and you buy your weapons from corrupt Russians. You can make the war last a long time. And Russia doesn't suffer overwhelming casualties there. They suffer a dozen a week. But over the course of a year, that's a lot. And then every once in a while, they get a direct hit like this a couple of days ago, which really means more than the actual number of men killed. I'm sure they're, probably looking at that. I'm always suspect of putting governments in power that come from us because historically it doesn't seem to work out very well. I mean, they don't have any sort of ties to the people. If the world, that world perception is one thing, but if the perception in the country is that he's been placed there by the imperialist dogs of, the West, then we have trouble, I think. Been rambling on. Is there any other questions at all? Any questions? Yeah. Well, I think that bin Laden could move around Afghanistan for another decade if he wanted to, and it would be really, really hard to find him. It's mountainous. The word is we have no intel on the ground. We have satellites. I don't know. But I think he could move around there indefinitely, unless, things really changed on the ground in favor of intelligence gathering for the United States or for the West. Well, that depends. I mean, I think that he's got friends on all of his in these countries on all his borders. I mean, the Islamic countries, Taliban actually killed the Iranian delegation 2 years ago or something like that. They killed like 9 of them. They just wiped them out one day. And there's been bad blood between those two. But it seems like Sunni, Shiite, Sufi, whatever, when they're faced against the West or us, they sort of all seem to forget all their differences. Remember, Iraq flew a lot of planes into Iran during the Gulf War. I don't know, did they eventually get those back? I mean, I know their pilots weren't mistreated. And they were enemies. They'd fought their war for a decade? So it's plausible that he could be. Whether leadership would take him, I don't know. They'd probably say, hey, man, you're safe in Afghanistan. I mean, what are they really going to do? I don't know. Lee?
There was a connection drawn between the assassination that took place and bin Laden removing someone that could have possibly been a force for us to contact and join forces with. Is there no one else in the lower ranks, I guess, of that group that could be allies to us?
Well, there has to be, because it is a northern coalition, so there certainly is personnel. I don't know who they are, and we'll see how that sorts itself out. Who will be the next leader of the Northern Coalition? I don't know. So there must be. It just hasn't made the press. But the Northern Coalition hasn't fared very well. They only hold 5% of Afghanistan. It's just that area. Eric Heyer and I sit in the back. We were there a couple weeks ago looking into Afghanistan from this northern area. It's so mountainous, and it's just, whatever. Try to fight in that area. That's probably the only reason Taliban doesn't take that area is because, one, what's to take, and two, is it really worth it? Which is anybody would suffer if they tried to root out people in that part of Afghanistan. So I think you guys must have to go at 1 o'clock. So hey, thanks a lot for coming. If there's any questions, come up afterwards.